Welcome to Payments as a Lifelines podcast, Disaster Lifelines. I am delighted to get to have Andrew Morton on here. Friends for a long time. He's a partner and the head of the philanthropy practice at Handler Law. Am I explaining that
Close
right?
enough. Yep.
Okay. So, Andrew, if you can introduce yourself briefly and the types of clients you have, because what's in your background helps to illustrate that.
Yeah, you bet. I mean, first and foremost, I'm a nonprofit attorney. I say that because there are a lot of attorneys who, for all the right reasons, dabble in nonprofit law, but aren't experts, and that leads to problems. We exclusively practice nonprofit law. The practice group that I oversee handles about 150, 175 nonprofits for which we do the governance, the compliance, the oversight. Among those, with all but a few exceptions, they're primarily, so-called athlete celebrity foundations. It includes, 85 or 90 foundations created by NFL players, a couple of dozen golfers, bunch of basketball players, which I suppose is relevant to the extent that it makes it even more important that we get the compliance right. Not only do we have to handle the legal requirements, but we have to go as far as to handle the optics and the best practices and the industry standards, to make sure that everything looks good. Even if it's legally right, it has to look that way to the outside world, which is not always the case. There are plenty of things you can do legally that don't look real great if you don't know what the law is.
Well, your expertise has been invaluable. So I'll pivot over to disaster, and because of my past experience, so often a disaster will hit, and you'll have a big sports name that raises $50 million, and then other sports folks that would be this person's competitors, I suppose, say, well, if that person can raise 50, I can raise 60, but they'll call me after they've already raised it and their buddy's just stuck it in his checking account or her checking account. And I have to explain to them, really, you need to go to Andrew because God bless you for the work you've done, but you want to do that compliantly. There's all kinds of bad things that happen if you don't do it compliantly. So I will tell to any personality, any influencer, call Andrew first and then start raising money so that we can get it out compliantly. But I'm grateful that we are not big sports names, but that Payments as a Lifeline gets to be your client. So I'm super honored to be part of that esteemed group.
Well, and I will say that, one thing about the nonprofit space is that nobody regulates, nobody has any issue with value coming into the nonprofit, right? It's, a nonprofit, as I like to say, can take anything, anywhere, anytime, any form, for any reason, meaning, nonprofits can accept cash or crypto, stocks, bonds, boats, planes, trains, computers. As long as the arrow is sort of pointing toward the nonprofit, everything's fine. Where PaaL comes in and where nonprofit law comes in is on the disbursements. All of the regulations, all the laws, all the best practices around nonprofit operations have to do with paying the money, when the money's going out the door, not when it's coming in. So, while I agree it's best, from go to have the advice of nonprofit counsel, what's most important is that by the time you get ready to disperse the funds, you have nonprofit counsel. Less important to some extent when it's coming in, but absolutely critical when those funds are going out to make sure that that's done in compliance.
Well, that's a good segue because for years and years you've said, I've heard you say to some of these big nonprofits, help people, but don't give money directly to people. There's all kinds of challenges in that. And then when you were with us in Miami at the fourth PAL FinTech Disaster Forum, you explained how that's changed a bit given the financial technology we talked about.
Yeah, I mean, the concept is that, it's always better to use a third party. So, for example, the clients we have that provide scholarships, we don't give checks to the students, we give checks to the university and have them apply it toward the student. When we, make grants to support medical bills, that goes to the doctor, to the hospital. And the reason for that is that, whenever a nonprofit is giving to another nonprofit, really ain't no rules. I mean, again, it's, one C3 giving to another C3, both are subject to the same laws, the same restrictions. So there isn't much to worry about when one nonprofit is granting funds to another one. The issue comes up, and probably common sense, that, if you provide cash to individuals, once they have the check, once they have the funds, then we pretty much lose control over how the funds are spent. There's no way in the moment to know how they're using the money. Because of that, there's a concept in nonprofit law called expenditure responsibility. And what that basically means is that when you do give money to individuals, you have to provide a reasonable level of diligence to ensure that they're used for proper purposes. So, for example, if you did choose to give a check to a student rather than to the university, then the principle of expenditure responsibility would mean that you want them to send you a statement of their account showing that the funds were applied to their tuition, or receipts from the bookstore, or whatever it is that they did with the funds. Have them document that it was used for qualified charitable purposes, qualified educational purposes. Since you can't do that with cash, that is why, up until I learned about, the features of PaaL and the prepaid cards, that was our rule. Like, we aren't giving individuals. Like, we will give to third parties, whether, again, it's a hospital or a university, or any sort of a third party that we can ensure the funds are going to the right place. Great. But without a technology like these prepaid cards, where we can oversee how the funds are used, that was a black and white rule for my clients. Was, we are not giving to individuals. We're only giving to third parties who can benefit the individuals. But that way, we don't have to worry about the same degree of this expenditure responsibility concept. I should mention, just in case an expert is watching this and thinks that I'm I'm misleading a bit. Again, expenditure responsibility, there are contexts where it is mandatory, primarily with private foundations. Don't have to go down that rabbit hole. But even though public charities, like the kind of nonprofits we think about, the ones who provide services to individuals, not just grants to other nonprofits, they're not required by law to follow expenditure responsibility. But again, the concept is a best practice. The concept is an industry standard. So even if it's not legally required, it's something that you have to do so that you don't have to worry about, the government coming back, whether it's IRS or a state attorney general, and questioning, how did you ensure that they're used for charitable purposes? Show me the documentation, the receipts, the invoices, the statements. All of that gets avoided when you can adhere to these principles and make sure that, that you've got this stuff documented. But all things being equal, not having to document it, that's obviously ideal. And that's what giving to third parties does. That's also what these prepaid cards do, is it allows the ability to give to individuals and immediately oversee how the funds are being used, or restrict the way the funds are being used, so we don't have to worry about improperly spent funds.
Well, exactly on that point. I remember somebody you'd introduced me to a few years ago is a fiscal sponsor. So for those who aren't familiar, and I wasn't familiar, they're like the legal and accounting back end for a lot of nonprofits. And at the time I was meeting with the CFO, they had 531 nonprofits under them,
Very
and
specific.
and and they had um, followed the rule that you had explained to them. But they had an instance where, and this was a disaster related, which is how I got involved. They wanted to give money to families to make sure that they were getting food and transportation and housing. And she said, "Oh my God, this is gonna be a nightmare. They're gonna have to tape their receipts and fax them in, and we're gonna have to record it all of our accounting." I'm like, no, 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 you don't. It'll all be electronic. It'll be done for you, and then you'll have the data, and you can do your reporting and slice and dice it for your donors. And she said, I could crawl through the phone and hug you like that. That's going to save us
Yeah.
so much time. So what I'm hoping the takeaway from people here, Americans are incredibly um, generous and really want to help those in need. None of them want to be suckers. So they want to make sure if they're donating into helping people, and they want those people to have the dignity and agency to go pick what they need for their own food and supplies. That by working with one of the payments as a lifeline fintechs, we can make it way easier, and all of that is done for you, and it's following best practices.
Yeah, and it's to some extent unique to, disaster relief because, again, if you've got a student going to college and applies for a grant, that's all set up in advance. Like we know
Right.
exactly where to send the funds, right? If somebody has medical bills that need to be paid, easy enough to figure out how to do that. But, in the immediate aftermath of a disaster, not that I'm an expert in disasters, except, just common sense, you're not going to have those third parties. Like you don't have the same ability. So we used to, before learning about, this fintech, um, the opportunity to use these prepaid cards and to have them restricted, it was a challenge because, we want to help disaster, folks who are affected by disasters, but again, like you said, the only option was give to them individually and be subject to, this expenditure responsibility standard, or don't give to them and find a way to give to organizations. And then it's almost the same thing. Like, how do we know that the organizations got the money to the individuals? So, what the technology did is it just sort of connected the dots in a way where we get the best of both worlds, where we can get funds to the individuals, but we can do it in a way that satisfies expenditure responsibility. And, before learning about this, again, that there was no opportunity to do both. Like you had to choose between giving to individuals based on expenditure responsibility standards, faxing receipts and stuff like that, which is the last thing that somebody needs to do when they lost their house or when they, when they've got these sort of, immediate personal issues. The last thing they want to do is collect a bunch of receipts. Or you had to choose not to give to individuals. So, this literally put those two together in a way that is, the proverbial best of both worlds, where we can get funds directly to individuals for immediate use and do it in a way that sort of has a self-enforcing expenditure responsibility baked in. So we don't have to worry about on the backside having them fax in a bunch of receipts. So that it's just not a practical solution for making sure that these folks have the basic, food, clothing, shelter, that sort of thing. It eliminated the choice. That was a horrible choice to be, to have to make a decision about. Do we help individuals or do we make them collect a bunch of receipts? And now, with this technology, you can do both at the same time.
That is brilliant. I think we're going to wrap on best of both worlds. And thank you, Andrew. Thank you for all you
You
do.
bet. Absolutely.